That historical science says that Josephine poisoned her husband. It's incredibly important to distinguish these two things. I'm seeing a lot of novels being published today by evolutionary scientists where they take it the next step. If you were a novelist and you wrote about the story of how Josephine poisoned her husband, that's called historical fiction. The problem is historical science can easily blur into historical fiction because there's no accountability. It's largely speculation.
Would you describe evolutionary biology as, in large parts, an historical science?
It is entirely a historical science. So this is why the distinction is so important. A lot of people say if you don't agree with the current form of historical science in terms of evolution, you are a threat to science at large. But you're not. Operational science is not being challenged. The space shuttle, modern medicine, modern agriculture, telecommunications, that's all operational science. It is not influenced by this discussion of human origins. Everyone is supportive of that type of science. Historical science becomes more and more uncertain and increasingly subject to error the further back you go and the more inferences that are made. And so very quickly when you talk about very remote or very ancient events, you're talking speculation instead of science.
I'd like to turn to a more operational science discussion here, and this is with respect to the evolution benchmark. There is an indicator that is proposed by the minority. It's in indicator 2B of the evolution benchmark, and it states new heritable traits may result from new combinations of genes from random mutations or changes in the reproductive cells. And then there is this sentence, quote, except in very rare cases, mutations that may be inherited are neutral, deleterious, or fatal. Are those scientifically valid statements, in particular the second one? And is this something students should be aware of to enhance their understanding of biological evolution?
I believe those statements are entirely accurate, and the second part of it relates directly to my own area of current research. I'm looking at the question of whether mutation plus selection can create a genome or even sustain a genome. And I've been studying the nature of mutation a great deal, and geneticists are universally agreed that mutation is overwhelmingly deleterious. The ratio of deleterious to beneficial mutations is generally put at 1,000,000 to 1. For every one beneficial mutation, there's as many as 1,000,000 deleterious. The most optimistic numbers offered, which I don't believe are well founded, are 1,000 to 1. And there are at least 1,000 deleterious mutations for every beneficial.
I believe you have a PowerPoint presentation that deals with this issue.
I'd be happy to share some of my current research with the committee if they'd like.
Okay. And also, in the standards that are proposed by the minority suggests that intelligent design not be required to be in the standards itself, so that teachers would not be required to teach intelligent design theory or to test the students on it, but that the state would encourage that it not be prohibited. And so as you comment on this issue regarding the beneficial mutations, I believe that your comments also tie into your idea that the data is showing actually evidence of design. Is that correct?
I believe there's evidence of design in the genome. The genome itself is evidence of design. I also believe that as we study the nature of mutation and the genome and what selection can do, that it is a powerful argument against one of the central tenets of evolution, which is that mutation plus selection creates information. So that's the technical side. The other side that you raised is, should this be open to discussion in the classroom? And I think I'll try to separate them and deal with them one at a time.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, so.
Okay, because for lack of time, let's skip through, keep going. Okay, let's stop there for a second. This is the theme of my research. I'd like to draw an analogy between biological complexity and the information that underlies it, okay? Most biologists would agree that the human body is much more complex than any human technology that's ever been developed. The space shuttle is enormously simple. It's child's play compared to the design of the human body. So seeking for a technological analogy to life, I've had to go into fictional technology, the SS Enterprise. Okay, this spaceship with warp speed engines and holodeck is a closer analogy to the human body than any other technology that we can think of. But most biologists focus on the biological complexity, which is above. But as a geneticist, I'm interested in what's beneath it. And that is the instruction manuals that specify all that complexity. That is the genome. Okay, let's, if we click. So, when we talk about historical science from a genetic point of view, the most popular view is that the genome is the book of life. That's a term that's often used in genetics, and that it is an instruction manual. And the central axiom of genetics, from an evolutionary point of view, is that the author of the book of life are misspellings and selective screening, or what's called natural selection. That is absolutely central to Darwin, and it is what's taught as the baseline truth for all evolutionary science. Okay. So I just help you understand what the current paradigm is. If you have a little red wagon and you have the instruction manual that goes with it, including the manual that instructs how to make the metal, how to make the wheels, how to make the rubber, how to make the paint, and how to put it all together. And if you start to introduce typographical errors into that, and you select for superior performance of the wagon, okay, that's mutation and selection, it will eventually evolve into a superior form of technology. So over time, you might imagine that misspellings have create an internal combustion engine and power brakes and all the rest to create a modern automobile. So a modern automobile is specified by a great deal of information, and if you include the robotic assembly lines and all the component parts, it's pretty mind-boggling how much information goes into an automobile. Enormous amount of specified complexity. But if we imagine more misspellings in the manuals, perhaps it will develop into a higher form of technology. If you invoke even more mutation and selection, you might get to the final step, which is the next one, which brings us to the Starship Enterprise. That is a very reasonable analogy for describing the primary axiom of evolutionary theory today. And so misspellings plus natural selection can explain that. Now, I always believed that. And about 5 years ago, someone challenged me and they said, "Are you sure that's true?" And I started to re-examine it. And I've spent the last 5 years examining that. And I'm here to tell you that it's not true. And it's amazingly not true. It's like very exciting to look at what selection can and cannot do. So I don't have, this would be an hour or two presentation for me to share with you what I've been doing. So I'm going to try to consolidate to 30 seconds, so I'm sorry if I rush through it. But the actual genome, of course, looks a little bit like this, ATCG, on and on. And if you look at a screen like that every second, so you're just scanning the genome, I'd like to just ask you a question. How long would it take for you to look at your own genome, to read your own genome? Of course, you're not reading it, you're just scanning through it, 1 page a second. The answer is if we could just imagine it clicking every few seconds, it would take you, if you worked 40 hours a week for the rest of your life and then some, it would take you 381 years, and you'd only will have read half of your genome. So there's a lot of information in the genome. And the question is, can mutations, which are misspellings, create that information or maintain it? So if we just click again, I'm going to skip over those. We don't have a lot of time. If you picture misspellings in a text, like an encyclopedia, any single misspelling is going to be incredibly trivial. Isn't that true? It'd be very hard to select. If you start to introduce misspellings into many different encyclopedia sets, it would be very difficult to distinguish which encyclopedia set has been more corrupted. But they're all being corrupted. Isn't that right? Can you picture how many misspellings would improve the content of the encyclopedia? That would be exceedingly rare, wouldn't it? That same fact is known for genetics. So if this graph shows a range of mutations. On the left, -1 means it's a lethal mutation. In the middle are mutations which have no effect. And on the right is a mutation which would double fitness, dramatic improvement. If this was true, natural selection would always work. You'd just select away the bad ones and select for the good ones. And you'd always have a net gain in information. But all geneticists know it's not true. Could we click again? When geneticists show the distribution of mutations, they don't show the beneficials. They're so rare that they're not even considered. But this is still too optimistic. If we could click again. Most mutations are what is called nearly neutral. That means that they have such a small effect that there's no visible effect on the level of the little red wagon. In other words, a typical misspelling in the assembly manual for a jet fighter will not have an impact on the jet fighter that you can measure and say, this jet fighter is better. Does that make sense? So this is actually a graph produced by a very famous evolutionary population biologist showing the distribution of mutations. And Kimura is famous for putting the box. You see the blue box?
The mutations on the right from 0 to 0.002, those are the positive mutations?
So,
and they don't show up.
Right. Kimura does not show any positive mutations in his graph. And then he shows the blue box. The blue box is mutations that are so subtle that they are unselectable. He calls them nearly neutral mutations because they have no effect. They involve you see they're deleterious.
2 minutes tonight.
Okay. Well, you see the difficulty of dealing with this in a short time. One more click. 2 more clicks. If you look at this graph, I would challenge any evolutionist to explain to me how evolution can occur. You can't select away the bad ones within the box. You can't select for the good ones in the box. The only thing you can do is select away the ones on the far left, which are the most deleterious mutations. So, sorry I couldn't give you the whole story, but it's very fascinating. The bottom line is that the primary axiom is categorically false. You can't create information with misspellings, not even if you use natural selection.
Thank you very much. Well, in the last 30 seconds, I believe you have reviewed the Minority Report in general. Do you have any general comments upon the propriety of those proposed changes?
The changes that were shown to me seem to be minor improvements. I'm not quite sure what the big deal is. They are minimal changes, in my opinion. It's incredibly important that students have freedom of access to all the information. And because there is a major controversy about the origin of information, the origin of life, whether the primary axiom is true, students have a right to know that. And there's nothing more stimulating for a student's mind than to be challenged with multiple hypotheses and being told, you research it and tell me what you think. That's awesome for students.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Your witness.
Mr. O'Donoghue, 16 minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have a few questions that I would like to ask you for the record. First of all, do you have a personal opinion as to what the age of the world is?
I do have a personal opinion.
And what is that personal opinion specifically as to the age? And I'm interested only in the age, not an explanation.
I believe that I was wrong in my previous belief that it's 4.5 billion years old and that it's much younger.
How old is the Earth in your opinion?
I cannot intelligently say how old it is, except it's much younger than I think is widely believed.
Give me your best estimate.
Less than 100,000 years old.
Less than 10,000?
Conceivably.
Conceivably less than 10,000?
Yes.
Conceivably less than 5,000?
No.
So is somewhere between 5 and 10,000 years of age?
Somewhere between 5 and 100,000. But I'd like to...
No, I'm asking
okay.
the question,
You
sir.
ask the questions.
Do you accept the general principle of common descent, that all of life is biologically related back to the beginning of life? Yes or no?
No.
Do you accept that human beings are related by common descent to pre-hominid ancestors? Yes or no?
No.
If the answer is no, as you have indicated, what is your explanation for how the human species came into existence?
My explanation, humbly offered, is that we were created by special creation, by God.
And when did that occur?
Relatively recent in terms of conventional wisdom. Yes, very recently by conventional wisdom.
Well, according to your opinion, when did that occur?
I'm not going to speculate on the
No, I'm not
exact
asking
issue.
you to speculate.
Well,
I'm asking
you are.
please listen to my question.
What is my
Based
opinion?
on your opinion, when did that occur?
It happened recently, and it's not just my opinion, it's based upon
Sir,
analysis of
I'm
the
not
genome.
asking about recently. Do you have a date?
I do not have a date.
Do you have an estimate of a date?
I do not.
Less than 5,000 years ago?
Yeah, I'm not going there. You can play that game, but I'm saying I don't know exactly how old it is.
All right.
But I do
That's
believe,
fine.
I'm willing to tell you that I think it's considerably much younger than people are generally told.
Have you read in toto the majority report to the Board of Education?
I have not.
So you have been brought here to criticize the majority report without having read it, correct?
That's incorrect.
It is true you have not read it.
It is true I have not read it. I didn't come here to
Sir,
criticize
just
anything.
answer my question.
I am answering your question.
The answer was no, you haven't read it. That's all I asked for. Do you believe that science teachers in Kansas, when teaching science and evolution as outlined in the current standards, and although you haven't read them based upon what you've been told, are leading students to this conclusion that they are meaningless accidents with no intrinsic purpose?
I believe that's a very common teaching in many public schools.
I wasn't asking about many public schools. Based upon what you've been told, is that your opinion as to what's going on in Kansas?
You're asking me to assess things I can't assess. I come here to offer my expert testimony in my area, And I'm sorry if I can't give you satisfactory answers to everything you'd like to know.
Do you agree with them? Have you read the Minority Report in toto?
Yes.
Were you struck that? Do you agree with the Minority Report that teaching science as it is currently practiced constitutes an indoctrination in the philosophy of naturalism, a philosophy key to non-theistic belief systems? Yes or no?
I believe that statement is correct.
Does this mean to you that the current draft 2 religiously, quote, discriminates against theistic beliefs such as Christians?
No, I think that's too strong a statement. If you're asking me to...
I just ask you for a
Yeah.
yes or no answer, sir.
Okay, so the answer is neither.
Neither. You say you hold a Christian view. You understand that that is not very helpful, as many Christians accept both the great age of the earth and common descent. Do you agree with that statement?
Many Christians hold many different positions. It's a very many positions are held by Christians. I offer that information because your line of questioning clearly goes there. And so I'm just telling you where I'm coming from.
Is the answer to the question yes or no?
Okay, let's phrase the question in. Your questions are
Let me
often
read the
quite...
question to you again, sir.
Yes, please.
You have indicated to us you hold a Christian view. And I suggest to you that is not very helpful.
That's okay. I
Let
just tell you where I'm
let
coming
me
from.
finish
Okay.
the question, sir.
Uh-huh.
And please understand, this is not in any way an attack on your religious views. We respect those. We respect those fully, and we would defend your right to whatever religious views you hold. That's not the purpose of the question. Would you accept then the proposition that many Christians, as scientists and as lay people, accept the great age of the earth as well as common descent?
Yes.
Do you agree with Mr. Philip Johnson's opinion as a strong proponent of the minority, as a strong proponent of intelligent design, that the teaching of science as is currently practiced is an indoctrination in naturalism?
Yes, I think that's generally true.
And you would define naturalism as a philosophy that does not allow room for a religious belief?
Well, naturalism is a religious belief, but it doesn't leave room for God.
And is it your opinion that the study of science, in an effort to simply understand nature and to provide natural answers to observations, must therefore be naturalist?
No, I think that the study of science is the study of the pursuit of truth using a methodological approach, which is reproducible by others.
And would you agree that that process must remain neutral as it relates to religion?
I believe that there's not a neutral scientist on the planet. When I was an evolutionist, I was not neutral, and as a person who believes in design, I am not neutral.
I'm not asking, sir, about whether or not individual scientists may or may not have religious views. I'm asking you whether their work in science the scientific process must, in order to be valid, remain free of a supernatural implication.
I disagree with that.
Is it your opinion that the science and the study of science in our school should include supernatural explanations to natural events?
No, I believe the educational process should encourage students to examine the alternative hypotheses and all the evidence, pro and con, so they can make intelligent decisions.
Would it surprise you to learn that that is precisely what the majority opinion states in this draft too? That students are encouraged, and in fact are encouraged with their teachers to discuss a broad range of ideas about evolution. You were not aware of that, were you?
I think that's great.
You were not aware of that, were you? Because you have not read the standards.
Yes, I don't feel bad about not having read the standards. I came here as a courtesy to the committee to share my expert opinion. If you don't like that, that's your problem.
Do you agree with Philip Johnson in the following quote? Liberal Christians, theistic evolutionists, are worse than atheists because they hide their naturalism behind a veneer of religion. Do you agree with that statement?
No, I don't.
Would you comment on the following statement by William Dembski, the main theorist of intelligent design, who wrote, "Design theorists are no friends of theistic evolution. As far as design theorists are concerned, theistic evolution is American evangelism, ill-conceived accommodations to Darwinism. What theistic evolution does is to take the Darwinian, I lost my page. What theistic evolution does is to take the Darwinian theory and make it, in fact, almost a theistic view." Would you agree with that?
No, I believe there's a very diverse group of scientists who dissent from the evolutionary perspective. They include theistic evolutionists, they include old Earth creationists, young Earth creationists, and a lot of people who don't know, but they just don't buy the evolutionary story.
Would you agree, sir, that there are observations for which we simply today do not have an answer using the scientific process?
Absolutely.
And would you further agree, sir, that those particular limitations have handicapped science since the beginning?
No, I wouldn't put it that way.
Is it your opinion that science has always been able to come up with the answers?
Certainly not.
So therefore, you would agree that historically, science has not always been able to come up with an answer to a natural observation at any point in time?
Yes.
And would you then believe that it is appropriate for scientists, when they cannot find a natural answer to observations, to simply rely on a supernatural explanation for that observation?
They should look for the best hypothesis to fit the evidence,
My
which can include a supernatural explanation when you're talking about origins and historical science.
Did you not tell me a little bit ago that science should be neutral? And if science should be neutral, how could it be a good idea to impose a supernatural explanation to something that we simply don't understand?
You're trying to put your words into my mouth. I'm sorry, I just won't be guided in that way.
Is science neutral? Is science supposed to be neutral?
Science ideally should be neutral. It seldom has been.
If science is ideally supposed to be neutral, how can you justify, because we do not understand a natural phenomenon, the attachment to the answer of a supernatural explanation?
You see, those are your words, not mine. What I would advocate is when we don't know something, we develop hypotheses and we test them.
Do you believe in intelligent design?
I do.
Do you believe intelligent design answers questions that we yet don't know in science?
No, I believe that it's not just a matter of arguing that we don't know enough, so it must have been God. I believe there's powerful evidence against the primary axiom, and that in the absence of adequate evolutionary explanations, it is reasonable and rational to seek other explanations.
Do you believe the National Academy of Science and all other major scientific bodies in this nation and indeed the world are simply biased against intelligent design?
I wouldn't say simply, but I do know that when surveys have been taken, whereas 40% of scientists believe in God, only 4% of the National Academy members do. So I do believe it represents a limited cross-section of scientists. Yes. And they're self-selected. You have to be, you're elected by existing members. So there is a tendency for that group to be homogeneous and self-selecting.
Homogeneous and what?
Self-selecting. To become a national member, you have to be nominated and elected by the existing members.
Do you think merit in knowledge, research, peered articles
Absolutely.
may have anything to
Yes.
do with that?
Yes, all the people on that committee are extremely intelligent, very highly accomplished scientists.
I have nothing further.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have 8 minutes.
Dr. Sanford, thank you for coming. I wish we could hear you speak for hours, actually. It's fascinating, and thank you for your work. Can you give me a number, a ratio of the mutations that are lethal versus those that are healthy? 1 to what number would I fill in the blank with?
Lethal to,
To a healthy or a positive mutation.
okay. Lethals are very rare. Beneficials are even more rare. I have to think about a number. I don't want to just throw
Okay.
a number out.
That's
But
fine.
lethals are extremely rare. They're not the problem. It's the near neutrals, ironically. It's like rust in a car. It's the stuff you can't see, the deterioration you can't see that you can't stop.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Dr. Sanford, you stated that evolutionary concepts were taught as foundational when you were in school, even doing your graduate work, and you believed them. Were those, after you went through your PhD program and postdoctoral and started into your research that you're currently involved in, were those concepts central to your research, the neo-Darwinian evolutionary concepts?
Evolutionary theory was taught to me since I was a little boy, and I didn't even know that people didn't agree with it. I considered it as universally accepted. When I was in college and graduate school and early in my career, it was more than a foundation. It was actually my religion. I based my personal ambitions and hopes and dreams upon it, helping to continue the evolution of the human species. And I defined my morality based upon what will advance evolution. But evolution did not help me in my work. My work was always directed from the point of view of there must be a logical explanation. In fact, the belief that we live in a rationally designed world is the reason why scientific exploration can be trusted to produce results.
I have been a proponent of empirical science. You've probably heard that. Observable, measurable, testable, repeatable, and falsifiable. Those are the tenets with which I believe empirical science is, with which people do good science. Does empirical science provide data of the type that would support one hypothesis and refute another?
Yes.
Is that something that would eliminate biases?
Generally, you don't find in the operational sciences a lot of controversy because things are verifiable. And if someone questions whether the density of gold is a certain amount, people go out and test it, and they put the controversy to rest. And so there's a strong consensus within operational science.
Would you like to discuss or comment on the philosophical claims or the religious claims that are made in the name of science?
I think that it's very important that when we as scientists talk about science, that we separate historical science from operational science. Because the benefits that mankind enjoys, like longer life and more creature comforts and the elimination of hunger, These things come from operational science. But historical science is more in the realm of philosophy. As you develop your theories of history, your theories are very much colored by your worldview, and you tend to paint a past that fits your ideology.
So how would you describe the ability of the majority draft, and how would you describe the ability of the minority draft to teach the student to distinguish between the different types of data and testable theories of science from religious and philosophical claims that are made in the name of science?
I believe that the minority report, where I've seen word-for-word comparisons and changes have been made, seems to take a small step toward greater objectivity and greater intellectual freedom for the teachers and the students, which I think is really good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As our next witness, we'd like to call Dr. Robert D. Silvestro, professor of human nutrition at, I believe it's Ohio State University. Dr. D. Silvestro, would you please give us a little bit about your background and your qualifications to testify with respect to the science standards?
Yes, I have a PhD in biochemistry from Texas A&M. I'm currently a professor of nutrition at Ohio State University. My research has evolved over the years, but with design, starting from very basic studies of proteins that contain minerals to now looking at some very applied human nutrition and other biomedical issues. And one of the things I do now to a large extent is try to design pharmaceutical and nutraceutical interventions that affect biological processes for a desired purpose. So I think I bring a little bit of a different perspective to this whole issue because I'm actually trying to change biological systems by design, and I think that gives me a perspective on how hard it is to get what you want without getting a lot of side effects. And I find it hard to believe that even with me knowing a little bit about life processes and how hard it is for me to get what I want without getting bad consequences, that random processes could do a better job than all of us PhDs can do when we're trying to change processes for good. I have almost 80 peer-reviewed scientific research journal articles, plus I've written various commentaries for both scientific publications as well as the lay public.
Are you working, or do you sponsor a research lab?
Yes, I have a lab. I currently have 5 grad students, some undergrads, a couple of technicians.
And what is that lab or that project investigating?
Well, as I said, we do a variety of things. I still do some real biochemistry. For example, now I'm involved in a project looking at multiple sclerosis. We're testing a hypothesis that if we can increase the gene expression for a certain zinc-containing protein and do it at several different stages of the process of gene expression, if we can do that, we might be able to minimize the symptoms of people that have multiple sclerosis. That's an example of a project I'm doing.
You mentioned that you were using design-type thinking in your current research. I would like you to comment on one provision in the evolution benchmark. It's indicator 6, and I need to put that up on the screen. Okay. The indicator says biological evolution is used as a broad unifying theoretical framework for biology. I might like to ask you to first comment on that. To what extent do you use evolutionary theory in the work that you're doing right now?
Well, there's the popular statement that nothing in biology makes sense in light of evolution. I challenge anyone to tell me any single area of biomedical research that one couldn't do if they didn't accept Darwin's current ideas. I'm waiting to hear it. I can't think of a single one, and that question's been asked to some people, and they can't give me an answer either. So in my work, what I work on could be interpreted in light of some evolutionary theories, but it's not required that I hold a particular theory in order to do my work. I could believe in Darwin, I could believe in punctuated equilibrium, I could believe in spacemen, I could believe in intelligent design, and I'd pretty much do the work more or less the same way. I know people are saying, well, you can't bring religious prejudice to the table. Well, if I'm not mistaken, Newton, who's one of the greatest scientists of all time, started with the premise of God designed the universe, so it was his job to figure out a little bit about what God did.
Moving on, in that indicator on the additionals on the right-hand side of the column, it says natural selection, genetic drift, genomes, and the mechanism of genetic change provide a context in which to ask research questions and help explain observed changes in populations. What kind of research questions are they talking about there?
Well, I think that's a common idea in theory, but not in practice. I've read hundreds of biomedical research papers. I've been to hundreds of talks, and evolution's only brought up once in a great, great while. For the most part, it's never even brought up, which is something I wanted to comment on, and it's in my written statement, which hopefully some of you got. When I was involved in the whole Ohio debate over the science standard issues, one of the counterpoints that was brought up was that in a debate you need to keep things fair. So we have two on one side and two on the other side. But if we were really debating all the scientists that could line up on each side, that we'd have thousands and thousands of scientists over here, and we'd only have a handful of people on the other side. I think that's an erroneous idea. In reality, there are a handful of people that have really gone through the Darwinian ideas that have come to the conclusion that they make compelling sense. There are a few like myself who've questioned those ideas and have come to the conclusion that they make compelling nonsense. But the overwhelming majority of scientists have never even thought about the question. My own case, I was an undergrad in biochemistry. I changed some of my spiritual beliefs during college, but I thought the whole idea of evolution was pretty irrelevant. My feeling was, well, let's get through that pretty quickly so I can go on to the areas that are really important that I'm going to use in my job. And I really didn't care about the issue. And it really wasn't until I was in grad school when I saw that there was this double standard, that my research and almost every other research I knew of was subject to certain kinds of scrutiny. And when it came to origins issues, origin of life, origin of species, that these researchers seemed to get a pass on the kind of scrutiny that my research and pretty much every other person's research was subject to. So that was really what got me interested. But I think the overwhelming majority of scientists, of life scientists, have not really considered the area very critically. Most of us are too busy trying to design drugs, study agriculture, examine ecosystems, do whatever we do for our job, and we more or less take the word of what we were taught, that Darwin's ideas are very solid because that's what we were told, and we're busy doing other things now. That's not just my opinion. That opinion has been reflected in a publication that goes around to a very large group of scientists, and the name of the publication is not very clever. It's called The Scientist. But there was a editorial in there where basically it was called Curiosity Won't Kill the Science Class. And someone was encouraging more consideration of Darwin from a critical perspective. His opinion was Darwin would come out pretty good if that was done. And he got all kinds of letters to the editor, and there was one letter written by someone that is in favor of the Darwin ideas, but he made this comment: many biologists, I regret to say, don't really know and understand the issue of evolution. And then it goes on, it says, and ask some biologists to define evolution in a short paragraph. You will wait, alas, in vain for a succinct and lucid explanation. I very much agree with that. I think most scientists have just never critically considered the issue.
I'd ask you to look at the very last sentence in that section we're talking about. And the sentence says, however, reverse engineering and indirect thinking are used to understand the function of or biosystems and information. And I guess that refers to bioinformation. Would you agree with that?
Yes, information, as was mentioned by the last speaker, is incredibly complex for life systems. And as I said, I try to deal with things. It's much easier to get things to go wrong than to get things to go right. And I've heard the comment, well, given enough time, the unlikely becomes likely. Well, like I say, it's given enough time, there's much more of a chance for things to go wrong and break down than to lead to something that functionally makes sense. It's much easier to mess something up than to make something work properly. Now, along those lines, I've heard, well, we have evidence for these microevolutionary changes within species. Couldn't they just add up to changing a whole species? Interestingly, a professor at Ohio State that teaches an upper-level course in evolution made the comment that that was one of the worst arguments that could be made for macroevolution. He said it's totally, it's comparing apples and oranges. The kind of changes that take place to make these little micro changes within species could never add up to make a new species because they're just two different processes. That's what he said, and he is someone that very firmly believes in Darwin and teaches a class on it. I might say by analogy, one could look at the record for high jump. It's gone up over the last 100 years. But nobody's going to say, well, given another 1,000 years, people, the elite high jumpers will start jumping over 5-story buildings. And nobody would accept that because the kind of changes you would need for that to happen go way beyond the kind of changes you need to make the record go up by a few inches at a time. So I would say that the tremendous amount of complexity in biological systems and the number of ways that things can go wrong compared to the number of ways that things can go right, and the limits to changes that take place in microevolution make it untenable to me to think you could make a whole new species or create life that way from no life.
In the work you do at the biochemical level, are you using methodological naturalism or some kind of methodological design to understand the system?
Well, I usually initially just start out by saying, how is the system currently working? And I could come to that conclusion either from a design standpoint or from a Darwin standpoint. I really look at what do we know, and a lot of times I don't know everything, but what do we know and how can I best affect that system? So I'd say I come at it neutral initially.
But do you ever look at the system as if it was designed and try to, assuming it was designed, try to figure out how that design or allow that perception to aid your investigation?
Sometimes I think that way in the sense of, well, if it was designed, what might happen? But in a lot of concepts of intelligent design, the initial design has changed. I mean, in a Christian concept, for example, of design, the Christian concept would be there was a designer that designed everything good and humanity's mucked it up. And so there would be evidence of problems as well. So even if I do believe there was a designer in the beginning, I also believe there could be problems along the way. So I may not always see the hand of design. So that's why I say I look really at the system as is, which could reflect design. It can also reflect problems that have developed.
There is an indicator that touches upon the description of scientific knowledge that I'd like you to look at. It's on the screen now. Scientific knowledge begins with empirical observations. Whoops, that's not the right one. Here it is. Scientific knowledge describes and explains, and the majority report would say explains the physical world in terms of matter, energy, and the forces. And the minority report would truncate that to simply say scientific knowledge describes and explains the natural world. Would you comment on those?
Yeah, I like that a little better because I'm not sure what forces are. And I think that's one of the reasons I've been interested in the revisions. I think there are some areas where the majority report is saying something that I look at and I say, well, that could be exactly what I think too, but I'm not sure because a lot of people will interpret it a lot of different ways. So I think the one of the good accomplishments of the Minority Report is to just say something specifically where there's room for more than one interpretation. So something like forces, I'm not sure what that means, and I like the Minority Report because it states things a little more specifically.
Going back to the evolution indicator, there is I'd like you to comment on this. This indicator talks about DNA, and there is a statement, the sequence of nucleotide bases within genes is not dictated by any known chemical or physical law. Is that a scientifically valid statement?
I would think so. Even in my son's classes at OSU, he's in honors biochemistry, and he says one of his professors said, "Boy, isn't it clever how nature manages to do all this?" And he's not coming from a theistic perspective at all, but he's just saying that we can't really figure out how some of this arose. And to me, this is one of the great arguments for the idea that there could be design in the origin of life is what's called ordered complexity, that you have order and complexity. I mean, you can have complexity, but it can be all gibberish. You can have order, like somebody saying, "Go Ohio State Buckeyes," but that's not really complex. But you can then have order and complexity where you have a Shakespeare play, for example. And the genetic code has got amazing ordered complexity in it. And no, I've never seen anywhere where anyone said we know how this came about. There are people that have ideas and hypotheses, but I've never even heard the most ardent naturalists say we know how life started, or we know the origin of the genetic code.
In the evolution indicator, or benchmark, indicator 1 explains generally biological evolution, the concept, and the additional specificity 1A. The Minority Report adds biological evolution postulates an unpredictable and unguided natural process that has no discernible direction or goal. Is that a scientifically valid statement?
Okay, that's really a philosophical statement, but I think it's important to state that because that's what a lot of people mean when they say evolution. And as was indicated earlier today, there are words a lot of people mean different things when they say in this whole debate and area. So I think that's good to define that. That would be what a lot of people would say. That's what I mean when I say this word. And just to kind of go a little further with that, there's been this idea that, what about the implications? Well, that type of a statement has profound theological implications. There are certainly people that can hold to certain beliefs and even hold to beliefs that are called Christian that would have no problem with that. They would just say, that's the way God planned it. There's other people that have certain beliefs that would really have a hard time with that statement, and they would say that that really goes against their beliefs. But my feeling about science, I've heard a lot already about, is science neutral. Science should be neutral in the sense of looking at the data and try as best you can to remove your prejudices in what it says. But science doesn't have to be neutral in what it concludes. We shouldn't say you can't teach certain things because it would have anti-religious implications. And that Darwin does, for many people, has anti-religious implications. But we shouldn't say, well, you can't get evidence to support that because that bothers someone's particular beliefs. By the same token, we can't say, or in my opinion, we shouldn't say, well, you can't look at any evidence that points to design because that has religious implications. You're neutral in terms of scientists. You should be neutral in terms of trying to examine the data objectively, but you don't have to be neutral in what it applies. And a good example has to do with astronomy and the Big Bang. At Ohio State University, there's a course taught in cosmology where they teach the Big Bang, that there's tremendous evidence for that, and the physical universe sprang from the non-physical. They then say in their class notes, now that's going to make you ask what caused that. Astronomy doesn't answer that question. So they don't seem to have any problem with looking at science and looking at facts neutrally, but then saying, well, there are implications, and science is supposed to say, here's the way it is, and then it's up to the philosophy class, the religion class, whatever, to deal with the implications.
In general, we have about a minute left. Could you comment generally on the minority report and your view about the propriety of the state adopting that?
Well, I think for the most part what the minority report at least did from my reading, maybe some other people read it differently, was it made some very specific comments in some areas. I think there are areas that if you read them, as I said earlier, if you read the majority report, you might come away with a feeling of, I agree with that, and then someone else might read it and see something completely different. So my feeling was what the minority report did was made some statements that were very specific to clarify some language.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. De Silvestro, Pedro, your witness.
I have just a few questions for you, sir. And for the record, I am interested, first, what is the age of the world, in your opinion?
Well, since that's out of my area, I can't really give an expert opinion, but I haven't heard of any major arguments against the 4.5 billion year old idea, so I don't challenge that idea.
Do you accept the general principle of common descent, that all of life is biologically related back to the beginning of life?
I'm unconvinced of that idea.
Do you accept that human beings are related by common descent to pre-hominid ancestors?
I'm unconvinced by that idea also.
If you are unconvinced by that idea, do you have an alternative explanation for how the human species came into existence?
I think design is a reasonable alternative.
And the design you suggest is by a creator?
I would put that in, and I would say it's reasonable, though there's other blind forces and other things that people might adapt.
Does intelligent design mean that human beings and other species were specially created since they weren't born of parents?
I would say intelligent design says that.
And do you agree with that proposition?
I would, but I wouldn't ask the state to agree, or I would not ask the state to teach my opinion in that area.
I would like for you to listen first to the sentence I'm about to read. There are many issues which involve morals, ethics, values, or spiritual beliefs that go beyond what science can explain, but for which solid scientific literacy is useful. Would you agree with that sentence?
Partly. I would agree that there is more to learn, but in science we have to make opinions based on data we have. And in terms of origins, we actually have a lot of data that goes against the Darwin ideas.
Sir, I just asked you if you agreed or disagreed, yes or no, with that sentence.
I'm not on trial. I can't answer
You're
that
not
as a
on
yes
trial.
or a no.
No. Sir, you're just simply being questioned. This is not a trial. Do you agree or disagree with that sentence?
Partly.
Were you aware that that sentence is in the draft 2 of the standards?
Yes, I am.
You took the time to read the standards.
I read the parts that I considered controversial. I skipped over some of the parts that I didn't think were relevant to what I was going to discuss.
Is it fair to say then that you have not read the totality of the standards?
That's fair to say.
I have nothing further for you.
Dr. De Silvestro.
That's very good with my name. Thank you.
You heard me say, I suspect earlier, that I am a proponent of empirical science. Is that something that you believe would support one hypothesis over another and refute another?
Yes, very much. I think that's, I guess, why I got into this whole thing, is I felt that when it came to issues like origin of life and origin of species, that the same good science standards weren't always applied. I did give a written commentary out here, and that's basically the title is, what constitutes good science, particularly in some areas of statistics and probability. Having gone through biochemistry, I never had a stats course, but now that I'm doing work with pharmacology, with nutrition, physiology, I've found that I have to use tremendous amounts of statistical analysis, and journals wouldn't even look at my papers if I don't have good stats. And I look at what I have to do to get a paper published. Then I look at some of the statements made, like the one I said earlier, given enough time, the improbable becomes probable. Well, in any other area of science, the question that would be asked back is, okay, how much time do you have available? How much time do you need before this becomes probable? And that's not asked here, and I think that's inconsistent with the rest of science.
Are there religious and philosophical claims that are made in the name of science?
I think there are implications, and as I mentioned earlier, maybe I've watched too many episodes of Law and Order, but I think that was kind of the asked and answered thing. I think what I said earlier still applies, that there could be implications of science finding, but science needs to go forward whether there's implications one way or another. If there's implications against certain spiritual or philosophical beliefs, they should be pursued. But by the same token, if there's some implications that help some spiritual or philosophical beliefs, I don't think we should say, well, we can't go forward in that area of science.
Which leads to the second part of that. How would you describe the ability of the majority draft and the minority draft to teach the students to distinguish between those two?
I think there's a lot of good guidelines in the majority report. I just think the minority report defines a few areas a little more precisely, and I think they'd be good additions.
I thank you. Yes. It is now 11:45. We'll break for lunch, and we will reconvene and start promptly at